Hi everyone. So as discussed, this week we're going to be looking at how to scrape data from web pages using Python. So this is a task that often comes up in journalism because there's a lot of data that's on the internet that isn't really available as, a CSV or an Excel or something, and we need to get that information. So we're going to pivot away from our city bike data and look at crime statistics instead, just to give you all a sense of this, and hopefully this will sort of help you think about how to do some of your own web scraping tasks that you might encounter. So I'm just about to open up Tana here. I'm just going to go ahead and start on the desktop, and I'm going to create a new folder to put this in. And basically, hopefully this will be valuable in part, not just for the practical application, but because it will... This is like screwing up all over the place. But because it will illustrate to you just how universal some of the systems that we've already seen actually are. So I'm going to create a new folder on the desktop. So start with new folder. I'm going to call this crime stats. And, I sort of chose this arbitrarily. I just wanted to look for something that might be of interest since we've been working with city bike data quite a lot. So I'm going to create a new file. So just like so I'm going to call this crime, call this NYPD stats scraper.py, right? So we start in the same place as we always start with this, which is that, well, I guess I need to auto-config my, my system here. Don't know why that happened, but here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by importing the libraries that I need. I don't necessarily know right at the start what all of them are going to be, but I do know a couple of them that I'm going to use. So one of them that I'm going to use is called BeautifulSoup. So BeautifulSoup, again, just like all of our other libraries, is a bunch of code that someone has written that is specifically designed for going through web pages and pulling data out of them. And this is part of an overall package called BS4, so that stands for BeautifulSoup 4. So instead of starting with import, I'm going to actually say from BS4 import BeautifulSoup. And what this is, I mean, you don't need to concern yourself with it too much. It'll be a lot of times if you're looking for advice on these things, you'll see them on Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange and places like that. But basically, whereas with import CSV, we imported the entire CSV library. In this case, we're actually importing just a piece of a library because the overall library is actually bigger than we need. And then the other thing we're going to import here is something called URL lib. So this is like CSV. Unlike BeautifulSoup 4, which is something we actually have to download separately, URL lib is like CSV in that it is a very commonly used library, so it's already on our computer. We just need to say, listen, make that library available for this particular program. So the first thing that I need to do, of course, is find something to scrape. And in this case, I'm going to look at the NYPD crime statistics. So I thought this was a nice example because it's information that seems sort of organized, but in point of fact, doesn't really have the data that I might be looking for because it has multiple file types here. It's, if I wanted to say, download the data from every single one of these, I would need to get the URLs individually, and these are mostly going to lead straight to a download. So there isn't really a good way to kind of automate this. And even though these precincts do kind of go in order, you can see that not all of the numbers are there, so I can't fully automate this. So this is kind of a good candidate for scraping that we might, is a kind of common example we might run into. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that the first thing that I want to do is just download the data. And the way I prefer to do this, I certainly can download and work on the web page directly. I prefer to download and save a copy of the web page rather than kind of working with the whole thing in memory. And that's basically because if something happens, if the program doesn't work right away, I would rather not be kind of opening the file over and over again or opening the URL over and over again. Once I've saved a copy of it, I can just work with that copy. And of course, I also have it saved on my computer, so it's clear to me exactly the data that I'm working on. It's easier to browse sometimes, I think, when it's on the desktop. So I'm just going to make a note of my target URL here. okay, which is this crime stats page. And then I'm going to start to work actually just downloading it to my computer. So the first thing I need to do is actually open the URL. And so this is going to be pretty similar to what we've seen, except that instead of just opening a file, we're opening a URL. And so the name of the verb right there is URL open. Okay. And then I just paste in the target URL as a string. Okay. And then I want to read the data. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to call this web data.read from my web page. Okay. So pretty straightforward. Again, very similar to what we've seen so far, except it happens that we're dealing with web page data instead of just regular CSV or text data. And, I see I have a typo there already. I'm not taking my own advice, copying and pasting. So now I'm just going to give this little comment. I'm going to say open the target URL and read the data. And now, like I said, I'm going to save a local copy. And I could even break these two things up, right? I could have something that just downloads the data. And then I could actually, once I've downloaded it once, I could just comment that out. Now, if I was doing this with real-time data, like a Twitter feed or something like that, right, I might want to constantly be looking at whatever was the most current. In this case, this data changes once a week or so, so it's not as necessary. But the reason why I bring it up is because if you start running your script too frequently, you can run into usage limits for services, right? So the one thing you don't want to do is start running something so many times that you end up getting yourself, or as has sometimes happened, an entire newsroom blocked from opening a given site because there's too many requests coming from your location. So I'm going to save a local copy of the web page. I'm going to just call it my local file, okay? And first I'm going to create I'm literally going to name it, it's just a local URL page. So I'm going to call it NYPD crimestats.html. And now we have our write function, but now we have actually a second letter in that write function. So before, if you remember, we had RU for the read, so that was read universal. In this case, we're going to have WB, and what WB stands for is write bytes, okay? So data, when we download it from the web, often comes as bytes. That's the unit of data in computation, right? So many of you are familiar with, if you see something has KB, that's kilobytes, MB is megabytes, GB is gigabytes. So what we're saying is write, but be prepared for byte type data rather than, for example, strings, which is what we've done in the past with our CSVs. So I'm just going to go ahead and write this. So I'm going to say local file write. And I want to write the web data, right? So I want the results of that read. And then I'm going to go ahead and close everything. So I'm going to, again, anything that I've used any kind of open command with, I'm going to close. So I'm going to close the web page. I'm going to close local file. Oops, local file. Okay, and again, the reason is that particularly with local file, because very shortly I'm actually going to open it up again and use BeautifulSoup to kind of transform the content. So again, similar to the dictionary writer that we use from the CSV library, the BeautifulSoup writer is going to give us, or the BeautifulSoup library is going to take as ingredients the contents of that local HTML file and give us a bunch of new verbs for looking through it and finding what we want to find. So just to make sure that there's no conflict, because we can't read and write at the same time, we want to make sure we close that local file before we go to open it again. And now, in fact, is probably a good time for me to actually test my script to make sure that everything's working okay. Because, yeah, if it's not, I would rather troubleshoot it now. So I'm going to go ahead and get on my desktop here, and I'm going to go into my crime stats folder, and I'm going to Python 3. Okay, and so, okay, so it looks like I have a little bit of an error here because I've imported a particular, I've imported URL lib, but I actually need to be a little bit more specific about what pieces of it I'm importing, right? So the same way that I have from BS4 import BeautifulSoup, I think I need to be a little bit more specific about what part of the URL library I am bringing in. So actually, the only way to do this is to look up documentation, which I did, which is that I actually need to say something much more specific, which is from urllib.request, okay, import URL open. I'm sorry that keeps coming up and blocking things. But, you know, I think that the key thing here is that when I get this URL open is not defined, you know, I've used this function thinking it's going to know what it is because I've pulled in the library that I need. And so anytime I get a not defined, it means you're trying to reference something that I haven't heard about before. And so, you know, in that sense, this troubleshooting process, whether it's because I've mistyped the name of a variable or because I'm trying to use a recipe that hasn't actually been imported from a library yet. Either way, it's going to kind of look the same, but also the remedy is pretty much the same as well. So let's try this again. Oh, interesting. Web data is not defined. Oops, yep, here we go. Web data equals webpage.read. So that's interesting. When I just tried to open it that way, it like actually opened it in a browser. I've never seen that before. All right, let's see if we do better here. Okay, so now it's upset about, it says an integer is required. Fascinating. All right, let me see what I can do with this. Line 8. Web page, web data equals, oh, haha, right, equals read. See, now I'm just getting sloppy here. Let's try this. All right, I'm going to have to go back to my dictionary here. All right, one more time. Here we go. It's going to be webpage.read. And it knows how to read. I don't have to give it anything more. One more time. Okay, so tuple has no attribute right. Okay. And of course, I forgot to put open on this. See, so this is one of those things, folks, where you just got to keep stepping through it. So on line 12, it was like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And of course, tuple actually, or tuple, means pair, right? And so what it was seeing before I had this open on here is I was saying, I was creating a variable called local file, and I was saying, hey, this is a pair. The first part of the pair is a string called nypdcrimestats.html, and the second part is this string called wb. And it was like, all right, fine, I'll do that. And it's like, what do you mean write with this? Because it's not a file. So one more time. All right, no news is good news. Let's see how we did. So if this worked as I hope, then I should hopefully be able to see this. Actually, let me open this in Aptana. That would be the smarter thing to do, is to look at it in, here we go, crime stats, and let's open it up. So what we're going to see here is actually the code rather than the web page itself, right? Rather than the one rendered web page. So now the trick is, anytime I'm scraping a web page, I have to do a lot of what we call inspection. I've just got to look at it, because what I need to do is find out what is unique about the pieces of HTML that contain the data that I'm looking for that I can use to ask BeautifulSoup to search for those particular pieces, okay? So when we come back, I'm gonna actually look at this in a web browser, so that, which will help us do that a little bit faster, do that process a little bit faster. But basically there's no other solution except to kind of go through and say, where's the stuff I'm looking for? And what is something that's unique or unique-ish on the page that I can use to get to that with my scraper? So I will see you all in a few minutes right back here.